before we begin going weiter, just to clarify a couple points, because someone asked, I think this is you asked, right, with the cheres? Was that you, the glaze? So I'll just clarify this. This goes back, I think, 2 shiurim that we mentioned about using a non-kosher dish. So we said that the sheet of the shach is that for metal, as long as it's every once in a while and it's clean, it's fine. If it's dirty, then it's a problem. But if it's clean, you could put something cold on it. But we said cheres you can't. Cheres is a problem. So we mentioned that going into a restaurant, cheres is going to be off limits. So your question was, if cheres is a glaze on the porcelain, right? The china is glazed and it's clean, what's the issue? So just to clarify, the poskim say the issue with cheres is not that we're choishish that it's dirty. Cheres could be as clean as everything else. Cheres, though, the nature of cheres is that it's so absorbent, the poskim are concerned that some non-kosher flavor might come out even when everything's cold and even when everything's dry. It's a chumrah of cheres. So it has nothing to do with the glaze and has nothing to do with, you're saying the glaze is the glass, but it shouldn't make a difference. Where machmer has the status of cheres in halacha, and cheres is so absorbent that we're chayshish that it'll come out. I've never heard any pasuk say that because there's a glass glaze on top will be makel to say that it's not absorbent. We're machmer that it has the status of cheres, and if it has the status of cheres, then we're gonna think that it's an issue. That seems to be the psak. Now that it's dirty, it's not dirty. Even if it's cold, it's so absorbent, it's so saturated with iser that it'll come out even on a good day. Okay. One other thing, just to clarify, we spoke last time about malicha. Again, these halachas are the nitty-gritty stuff, we got to work through it. We spoke last time about malicha, that we said that according to the Shulchan Aruch, malicha is only a problem if it's so salty that it's the amount of salt that they basically use to remove the blood. But the Rama is machmer, even a little bit of salt. So you mentioned that there's a concept called kavush. Kavush means pickling, right? We said kavush hareyu k'mevushel. Now kavush means sitting in a brine or sitting in a liquid. Now for regular water, it's 24 hours. For a brine, it's even shorter, much shorter. If it sits in a brine, it could pull out flavor in a much shorter amount of time. The amount of time that we'll get to it, but it's the amount of time that it basically takes to cook that item. So if I take a piece of steak and I sit it in a brine that has, cheese, and the brine, I don't know what type of brine has cheese, whatever it is, then if it sits there long enough, if it sits there 24 hours, it's for sure a problem. But if it sits there long enough to cook this steak, however long it takes to cook a steak, then it'll be a problem. So you asked the question, you said, I don't understand. Malicha, if the bride definitely has salt in it, right? So, exactly where is the distinction between malicha? We're so machmer, it hasn't been 24 hours yet, or it hasn't been, let's say 20 minutes or 30 minutes. But I thought malicha is a problem right away. So what's the distinction? So the answer is twofold. First of all, what Brad said, which is malicha, if you go according to the mechaber, it has to be very, very salty. Brine doesn't. Brine is just a liquid. But there's another answer, and that is, again, if you got the question good, if it didn't bother you, then fine. But if it bothers you, the answer is, and that is, malicha and kavush are working fundamentally different in that malicha only penetrates kedei klipa, kavush will asa the entire thing. You need shishim. So that's why it's important to know what's kavush and what's malicha, because kavush is much more severe than malicha. You're right. If you're putting in a brine, it's definitely salty, but that only get you kedei klipa. You want to be machmer and make the whole thing treif, you need shishim. That you have to enter the world of kavush might take a little bit longer. Okay, let's run through the next. Try to get, what I'd like to do is definitely finish the Siman. I want to start the next Siman, maybe even do Bays. We'll see. Bays is a whole giant, it's a sandwich. It's huge. So I can't really, it's going to be its own thing, and I need more hachana time to really get into it. So let's begin Sif Zayin. I wrote a Hakdama. The Hakdama is from the Oiz V'Hadar. The Oiz V'Hadar is really phenomenal. They replace everybody. Now, I mentioned many times that part of the challenge, this is true in all halacha, but specifically Basar B'chalav and Taruvis, is that you think you know, and then you get to another Sif and you're like, oh, I don't know. Shabbos, if you know muksa, you know muksa. It's shin ches to shin yud beit, you got it. There's no a lot of, there's no quick turnarounds in Reish Nun Dalet. It doesn't work like that. These halachas are different. We spoke last time. Let's just talk out. We spoke last time that if there's two items, one's hot, one's cold, you go with the bottom one, tatagavar, which means if a hot piece of meat falls onto milk, you just need klipa. That's it. And if everything's cold, it's mutter. You just rinse it off. And if you'd stop right here, that would mean that you come home, and this happens, by the way, where people will learn these halachas, they'll go home, and they'll think something, and their wives will be like, no, like, no way. And the wives are often right, because all these halachas, all this learning is just trying to get to like the basic intuition that most Jewish women have. And so you come home, you have a piece of chicken, cold chicken, that you had a barbecue 2 nights ago, cold chicken. Oops, you drop it in, a dairy dip. So you'd be like, oh, I'm learning the halachas. It's cold, rinse it off. First of all, there's no way. I'd like to think none of us would actually eat this because Baruch Hashem, we have enough money. Toss it, right? There's no way you're eating a piece of chicken that was sitting in sour cream. But you say if it's mutter, it's mutter. Your wife will not be cool with it. I can tell you right now, there's no one's wives who here that would eat this chicken that was sitting in sour dip after rinsing it off. There's no way. But you say it's mutter, not so pasha. So if you look at the Hagdama to Sif Zayin, the Hagdama is as follows: Basar shenafel techol tzoinin. We had this. If meat falls into cold milk, so the bottom item is cold. Im habasar cham hu nesa kedei klipa v'lo yoser. Because the top item is hot, but the bottom item is cold. The piece of meat only aser kedei klipa. A peel off a little bit, a tiny bit. Ki tato govar. V'lochein acholav shutachta mitzoinin goiver. The bottom material is colder, it's stronger, it dominates. Vein habasar elyon beleim achol v'kedei klipa. That we had. Further, v'imgam habasar tzoinin, and if both items are cold, einay nesa klal eladai bahadacha. Great. Bram, however, b'sif zayin, b'sif zeh mischadesh. Now the Mechaber tells us not so pashut. Shebasar tzolui v'cham. If let's say the piece of meat falls in and it's hot and it's roasted, meaning it's a piece of hot roasted meat. It's not hot raw meat. I don't really know how you could have hot raw meat, but it's not hot. It's hot roasted. So now all of a sudden, shenafel techol tzayni yitacha sheyeser kulei. You need shishim, and it's a problem. Not just you need shishim, according to most places, it's treif. Nothing can help you. V'loy rakadei klipa. What's the case? V'ze'echa b'shnei efanim. One of two situations. Aleph, kishiyesh b'basar sadokim. If the piece of meat has cracks in it, as we'll see in a moment, all meat that you roast, if you look at it, it has cracks. Raw meat is pretty smooth. Raw chicken is pretty smooth. If you take a piece of meat and you put it on the barbecue and afterwards, it has cracks. It dries out, it cracks. If it has cracks, and it was hot and it fell in, it's not kedei klipa. Toss it. As we'll see why, because the milk goes into the cracks and you can't get it out. Even shishim, by the way, according to most opinion, won't help. Because what's the point of shishim? Shishim means that it distributes evenly, right? If there's 60 times, that means that the milk is evenly distributed in the meat, and it's batal b'shishim. But if it's puddled in the cracks, and I can't, some cracks are deeper, some cracks are not as deep, then it's a problem. So if the chicken has cracks in it, and as we'll see in a moment, according to most poskim, all roasted meat has cracks in it. So in other words, if the meat is roasted, and it's hot, and it falls into cold milk, toss it. Secondly, which is not as relevant, even if it's raw, but it's covered in spices. So you have a piece of raw chicken that you were sitting in like a jerk sauce, like you're sitting ready to get it spicy, and it's super spicy, by the way. Mamish, like ad kedei kachas, we'll see according to most poskim, it means that it's so spicy you'd have to rinse off the spices before you eat it. It's very, very spicy. And then it falls into raw milk. So you'll say, oh, it's salty, kedei klipa. No. If it's raw, if it's spicy, toss. If it's hot and spicy, toss. No, so this is a different. This is big. No, this is mitova b'tavlin, spices. I don't think it has to be salt. It's saying even not salt. Probably could be salt, but the point is, so if it's hot and has cracks, or if it's hot and is covered in spice, a jerk sauce, then it's worse than malicha. Toss the whole thing. Oh. So that's the Mechaber sheet. It has to be hot. So the Mechaber says it has to be hot and it has to have cracks. Now, the Harama Moisif, but the Ramah comes in and adds, the Ramah is Machmer, Sheyesh Oimrim, that some say, Shebasar Tzaloy Umavushal Afilu Tzoinin. The Ramah says what you were saying, which is, that if the chicken has cracks in it and it falls into milk, even if it's cold, toss it. There's no way you can make it. It's a problem. Shishim won't help because the milk is going to penetrate into the cracks. Shishim's not going to help you. And you can't even peel it off because some cracks are deeper, some cracks are more, more narrow, whatever it is. Toss the whole thing. No. According to the Ramah, no. Because you don't know how deep. If you have a steak, you don't know how far it goes in. The cracks, and they're puddled, and we don't trust you. The concept of kalipa is that I know it hasn't gone further than that. This, I don't know where it's gone. Toss it. So according to the Mechaber, if it's hot and has cracks, it's a problem. According to the Ramah, even if it's cold and has cracks, you got to toss it. And that's why we'll see it inside. It's not very complex. Yeah. Right, it's roasted previously. I told you, it's out of the fridge. You had barbecue last night. So you had a piece of chicken. So it's cold. You dropped it into sour cream. You can't rinse it off. According to the Ramah, toss it. And that's why I mentioned these halachas are so... I've mentioned this in the past. This is something my father told me because I think I mentioned the story. I'll mention the story again because I'm tired and it's a good story. So the halacha is that someone called me one time. I was giving a shir. It was in the old Hashivenu. I'll never forget. It was Mrs. Brum. It was Chani Brum. She called me, and I was in the middle of giving a shir. My father says, "You have a shayla." So I go to the kitchen. I go to his office, and the case was she cut an onion with a fleshik knife, cut into cubes, whatever it was. So the onion now is fleshik, right? Cut it with a fleshik knife, and then she put in a par of fruit processor. So she wanted to know, is the food processor fleshik? So I answered the phone. I said, was the food processor, was the knife that cut the onion used in the last 24 hours for meat? You're giving a face. I'm an idiot. I was an idiot then. So I said, was it used in the last 24 hours? She says, no. I said, that's fine. Click. I go to the other room. I continue to share. I've never felt better about myself. Like I'm giving shiurim, I'm answering shilas like David Cohen. So my father says, my father's like, what was the shilas? I probably was like talking down to him. I was like, don't worry, like whatever. So I told him what it is, and he gives me a look, and my father's very sweet. He's like, I thought the onion negates the 24 hours. And I'm like, oh. Shoot. So I call her back and I said, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. You shouldn't be calling me. I said, I will get the answer for you, but I don't know what I'm doing. So I called Rabbi Steinberg. Rabbi Steinberg answered. He said, it's fine. Click. So I'm like, he made the same mistake I did. Turns out it's not a mistake. There's a Magen Avram that holds that although a knife cutting an onion the onion will pull out the flavor of the knife, but if the onion is then cut with another knife, a par of knife, the onion will not penetrate into the knife. It's a sheet of the Magen Avram. Some Magen Avram Pri Megadim. Rabbi Steinberg was telling me the Basar. And I remember from them, my father was like, whenever you get these shilas, take a beat. Just tell him, call you back. Just call you back. And again, it comes to these things also. It would be very easy to stop after what we learned last week and say, you know what? Everything's cold, you rinse it off, it's mutter, and then comes the Ramah out of nowhere and says, no. Call them back and tell them that if it's cold, but if it was previously roasted, so it's cracks, you got to toss it. So let's just see the Mechaber inside. Sif Zayin. The Mechaber says, Hadim eflaginon, be'nechol machmas milchoy la'ener nechol machmas milchoy. That which we said last time, that if it's super salty, it's beleya kedei klipa, and if it's not salty, it's not. Meaning that if it's cold, everything's fine, right? And if it's hot, the bottom one is cold, it only cook they clean. But this whole concept, hani mili bebasar chai, all of this is true with raw meat that doesn't have holes in it. Avol tzli roiseyach shenofal lemaliach. But if it's roasted, that falls into something that's salty, afilu necha machas milcha, even though there's not a lot of salt. By the way, the Shach points out, the salt in this mechaber is unnecessary to be here. You could take the words out. There's no reason why the mechaber is mentioning salt. He's saying, if you have something hot that falls into cold, and there's salt, but not a lot of salt, the salt is a completely irrelevant factor. So something hot that falls into cold, boy klipa, you need a klipa. Now stop, by the way, pause. The mechaber has started off by telling us that if it's hot and it falls into cold, it has salt, but not a lot of salt, you need kedei klipa. You know what this halacha is? Tata govar. The Mechaber is starting off by saying if something hot falls into something cold, you need a kedei klipa. So if you look at number Aleph, this is from the Oiz V'Hadim, the Kurz Siunim, Ein kan bereisha shel siv chiddush. There is no chiddush in this part of the mechaber. The mechaber is just laying down the foundation. That which we said last time, that if the top one is hot and the bottom one is cold, you need kedei klipa. But klipa will fix it. Now comes the mechaber. V'im yesh boi bakoyim. But if the meat has cracks in it, now, by the way, pause. If you look in Beis, how do I know if a meat has crack? What am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to, the expert of checking, what am I supposed to do? So they bring down. Davar motzei hu sheyesh sadakim bebasar. It's very common for meat that's cooked to have cracks in it. V'rei b'maram shif shekasav. D'l'chayre einanu bekiim kol kach eza basar nikra chalak ve'eza nikra sheyesh b'sadakim. The maram shif on the Gemara already says, we don't know, and therefore you have to assume that the meat that you have that's already cooked has cracks in it. Ubarach hashulchan kasav. The Aruch HaShulchan adds, shalpi haroiv, that al pi roiv bitzli oy bevushel yesh bakoyim. Al pi roiv, there's cracks. So if you have food that was cooked previously, either roasted previously, boiled previously, cooked meat has cracks in it. Okay. Now, if you go back to the top, so the Mechaber says, yesh bakoyim, if it's hot and it has cracks in it, or it's hot and it has a lot of jerk spice on it, it's very, very spicy. Now, by the way, how spicy? If you look in Gimel, the Chavis Das writes, the Chavis Das says, it has to be that it's so spicy it's inedible. So you say, how are you going to eat it? The answer is, you got to rinse it off. Meaning, it's hot, but it has so much spice in it, but before you serve it, you're going to rinse off the spices. So either if it's hot and has cracks, or if it's hot and it's super spicy. By the way, that's the Chavis Das's approach. The Yad Yehuda says no. The Yad Yehuda says it just has to be, it's edible. It's just, it's hot chicken wings. So, it's edible. It's going to be spicy. That's the intention. Okay. The point is, so if it's hot and it has cracks, so says the Mechaber, kuloi aser. It's entirely a problem. Now, if you look in Dalid, Kasav a Pri Chadash, the Pri Chadash adds, Shakasha Yesh bebasa sadakim. The Mechaber says Kulei Aser. He doesn't say Shishim. Because the Mechaber is being literal. If there are cracks in it and it's hot, it's Aser Lagamri. Shishim's not going to help. Shishim means that the item is evenly distributed amongst the dish. It's not evenly distributed. It's found in those cracks. And therefore, Shishim's not going to help you. Because what's Shishim going to do? If I know where it is, I just can't get to it. Right? Shishim doesn't help. If I see the chazer floating around on top, it's not Shishim's not going to help me. It's right there. You got to get rid of it. So says the Pri Chadash, Kasha yesh b'basa sadakim gami yesh by Shishim keneged achalav aser. Shishim's not going to help. Ki ein achalav nivla u'mispashe b'shava, because it's not evenly distributed. It's found in those cracks. Therefore, the Mechaber is telling us if it's hot and it has cracks, it's the kulei aser. Comes the Ramah. Back to the top, the Ramah says, "V'hu adin afoyu mavushal." First of all, it doesn't have to be roasted. It could be baked, cooked. It'll all have cracks. That's the nature of food. That as you cook it, it dries out on the surface and pops. Comes the Ramah, v'yesh oimrim da'afilu heim tzoynenim dinahachi. The Ramah adds, even if it's cold. So if I have chicken that was cooked yesterday and it's from the fridge cold, but it has cracks in it and it falls into the milk. So the Mechaber would tell you it's mutter. Maybe you have to rinse it off. Maybe you have to peel the top. I'm not sure what the Mechaber would say. I think it would just be mutter. Rinse it off. Because the Mechaber would say you need the cracks plus the heat. The Ramah saying, no. Cracks alone, it's an issue. And then the Ramah says, Dina hachi, v'chein yesh linug made hefsed meruba. And this is who you should follow unless there's a hefsed meruba. If there's a hefsed meruba, you could be lenient if everything's cold. You just rinse it off. But if there's no hefsed meruba, you got to trash the whole chicken. Now, I would say this. Again, what's the example of hefsed meruba? If you have a big feast coming and all the cold chicken fell into cheese sauce, whatever it is, and by throwing it out, it's going to cause me a large financial loss, then okay, you could be lenient. But that's, and I mentioned in the past, because I was trying to see if there's anything on this, the Paiskim, on these sugyas. The only thing they talk about is what's the definition of hefsed meruba. If you remember this, I think I mentioned this year in the Shiurim from Rav Gusman, that Rav Gusman said that he heard from Chaim Oizer that the definition of hefsed meruba is the type of money, the type of amount of money lost that you would complain to people. That's what he says. Okay. I don't. That's not my style. I'm not that guy. I'm not a complainer. But.
And what about the people who are going to be eating this stuff? Maybe they wouldn't want to eat it, because.
I don't know. No, the point. Obviously, it's referring to someone who's like a genuinely like not a complaining guy. If he's just like it ruins his day. That's the point. You're saying to serve it to others?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a separate shaila in general.
Neil Mark actually.
Huh?
It is subjective. It has to do with
No, it's 100%. He's saying his point is it's a separate shaila, and that's a huge shaila in general, and it's a good shaila, and he's actually asking a very, very good shaila, and that's not addressed here, but it's just addressed. It's a concept in general. You have a situation where the halacha is yesh lahakil b'makam hefsid. Okay, so a classic case to avoid your shaila is it'll be a hefsid for me, and I'm going to eat it. Okay, he's asking, am I allowed to serve it to others? Because it's hefset to me, it's on their cheshbon, am I allowed to serve it to others? It's a very good question. The truth is, Rebelsky, in many, many chuvas, writes that for the OU, he felt that they should not do this, that the OU would not rely on heterim on other people's cheshbon. I can tell you on a personal note, which, we'll go weiter. I'm sorry, it's already 23 already. But as a personal note, I remember my mother makes a kiddush. I don't know if she still does, but she used to make a kiddush in the house. First of all, by Hashivenu, used to be in the house, whatever it was. She'd make the kiddush, and she wanted to know if she could heat up food in the warming drawer on Shabbos. So I think it's fine. I'm not going to serve to people. So I called Rabbi Olbam and Rabbi Steinberg. I spoke to Rabbi Steinberg, and he said it's fine. Okay, I said Rabbi Steinberg says it's fine. People from the neighborhood, it's the head of the Vad, that's fine. But you're right. To serve food to others, it's a much higher madrega. That's why we don't have those warming ovens. I spoke to Barry, and he told me that, because I thought it was a problem to put the food in. I know a lot of caterers do. I would think it's a bit of a shaila. I spoke to Barry. He told me that I think the OU is not a fan, if I'm not mistaken. The Starkey also, he says, not a fan of putting food in on Shabbos because it's like putting it in an oven on Shabbos, which we're machmer. And even though there might be makim v'megel, I said if people are coming here, they expect the food to be of a certain standard. They shouldn't, think, it's heterim. You're right. It's a very good point. Whenever we're dealing with hefsed meruba, to serve to others, you have to reckon with whether it's.
We added associated to this mitzvah. Is that another qualifier?
We had that in the past. Sometimes the Mechaber mentioned last time that it's hefsed meruba v'sudas mitzvah. I don't know why the Mechaber sometimes mention that. I guess that's more necessity to be makel. Last time it was you need to be both, but the Mechaber talks about it different times. I think it would be rinse it off. I would think that if it's cold, he just says makom to be makel. I don't think you'd even need anything, to be honest with you. Let me just very, very quickly. I'm sorry, I should have. It's a good point. I think, I would think that it's completely mutter. Yeah. Shloi leser kulai. Oh, so he says ulam b'shach noit lahachmer afilu makom. I'm sorry. Chen legabe. Yesh l'hakel dal haroiv b'kilof bilvad in hefsed meruba. Oh, interesting. That's interesting. He has a very clever chap. I don't know who they're quoting. He says that really it's mutter, right? The Ramah would tell you that if it's cold, throw the whole thing out. But hefsed meruba, you could be makel. So makel in what? So I thought rinse it off. He says you should peel it. Why? Because peeling is not going to be a hefsed meruba, right? It's a hefsed meruba to toss out the whole chicken. It's not a hefsed meruba to peel the outside. So once you're able to peel the outside and it's not a hefsed meruba, then you don't really have a heter. But I guess if peeling it would cause a hefsed meruba, then you could be makel to just rinse it off. Just to finish up this siman, this last sif in the Mechaber is not anything new. This is from the beginning. I'm not sure why it's here, but this is we had in the beginning that basar b'chalav da'iraisa. It has to be cooked together for it to be da'iraisa. Then it's aser b'bishol and aser b'hana. Ein basar b'chalav nesa yidei melicha yidei kibush. If you had basar b'chalav through salting, or basar b'chalav through pickling, so it says lo sivashel. So if I take meat and I soak it in milk for a day, although the milk is penetrating because kavush is kimavushal, it's not basar b'chalav doraisa. It's only derabanan, and therefore eina nesa ela b'achila v'lo b'hana. It's not aser b'hana because basar b'chalav derabanan is not aser b'hana. Let's just move on. Let's begin. We'll do Sif Aleph, and we'll save Sif Beis for next time. Sif Beis is a whole different world. Hakdama to Sif Aleph, we'll run through it fairly quickly. This is from the Hakdama from the Ois V'Hader. Chaticha ketana shel basar shenaf l'teich kedera maleir cholav reseach. You have a piece of meat that falls into a hot pot of milk. So, what's the halacha? So let's think about it. A meatball falls into a hot pot of milk. So the meatball's aser. No question. The meatball's tiny. It's definitely not shishim. So the meatball's a problem. Toss it. What about the milk? So I would be programmed to think shishim. Now, if you remember, I think I mentioned this once in the past. The Mechaber, Sfardim, don't automatically go Shishim. Their initial halacha is get a guy to taste it. They initially go with taste. Taste the milk. If you taste meat, it's a problem. If you don't taste meat, it's not a problem. Now, obviously, a Jew can't taste it, because if it's basar b'chalav, I'll be over nisser. Get a guy. Ashkenazim don't rely on goyim tasting it. This is talked about later on. So according to the Mechaber, if a meatball falls into a hot pot of milk and is boiling, you throw the meatball out. The milk, you don't need shishim. If you have shishim, it's fine. You don't need shishim. Get a guy to taste it. If the guy tastes meat, it's a problem. If the guy doesn't taste meat, it could be 1 in 40. You're fine. That's the Mechaber Shita. So they bring down over here. Chaticha katana shel basar shenafal tikadei shem leich chalav v'seach. Habasar b'vadei nesa. Right, the meat is for sure a problem if it fell into the pot of milk. Ki b'yoyse mu'at b'vadai murgash boy im hachalav shabola. Because the meat is for sure not batal b'shishim. It's for sure a problem. Ach legabi achalav, regarding the milk. Ein yudua im habasar polatocha lachluchas b'shir shemurgash by tam basar eloi. I don't know whether it's a problem or not. It depends on the ratio. So the right nagdama. Dasa mechaber. The sheet of the mechaber is shishlahatim esacholav legoy. V'lismoich ala mirasai. Have a guy taste it, and the guy will tell you. Imurgash by tam basar eloi. He'll tell you if it tastes meat or not, because the mechaber relies on goyim. We do not. Ashkenazim do not. V'harama choylik v'sayva she'ein lismoich al goy el tzar shebacholav shir shishim k'neged habasar. Okay, let me just say out the next part. I'll just say it outside. According to the Ramah, it's super easy. Go with shishim. If there's shishim, you're fine. If there's no shishim, you're not fine. It's binary. It's yes or no. It's 1 or 0. The mechaber, though, is a little bit tricky, because the mechaber, it's not shishim. You get a guy to taste it. But here's the point. Anyone who's doing daf yomi, we had this in daf recently. It only works to get a guy to taste it if you remove the meatball while the milk is still boiling. Why? While the milk is still boiling, it's too busy boiling. It's too busy when something is boiling. It can't multitask. The milk can absorb the flavor of the meat, but it can't push back. It can't do both. It can't pump into the meatball. It can't go 2 ways. So they explain like this: Baram chshash noisef noitzer kan legabi achalav. Sharei basar balak tzas chalav v'chalav ze nemar nesar mikvar shekibel tam basar. V'achar choyzer chalav ze v'niflat el shal chalav shal gedera. V'yishles as a chalav im ein b'shir shishim kenegdai. Ki b'zel chaladeis loy toyel timas goy sharei tam achalav ha'aser v'hamuter shavim. In other words, here's the issue. The meatball falls into the milk. The meat is pumping out flavor into the milk. Get a guy to taste it. If he tastes meat, fine. If he doesn't taste meat, then it's a problem. If it doesn't meat, it's fine. I don't care about shishim, just taste it. Here's the issue. Why am I not concerned that we had this in daf yomi? The meatball is going to suck up milk flavor and then pump out milk flavor. It's going to suck up milk flavor and pump out milk flavor. Then all of a sudden, in this pot, there's not just meat flavor I got to worry about. There's milk that was in a meatball that came out. And the guy's not going to be able to taste that. Now, according to the Ramah, this is not an issue. Just go with shishim anyway. The whole thing is going to be shishim. It's not going to be a problem. But according to the Mechaber, that doesn't care about shishim, he goes by flavor, it's a bit of an issue, because I'm not able to tell the flavor right away, because I'm not necessarily looking for just meatball flavor. I'm also looking for milk that was in a meatball, which, by the way, tastes like milk. Correct. The context of daf yomi, whoever's doing daf yomi, this was a big issue because it's min b'minai, and if you hold min b'minai is not batal, that means that I have meatball flavor, which is min b'eino mino, batal b'shishim, but then I also have milk that was in a meatball that's now in other milk, which is min b'mino. And the Gemara was going with the approach of min b'mino is not batal. We don't paskin that way, so the Gemara was having a hold to do that. It was a big issue. We don't paskin that way, but we do have a problem according to the Mechaber. So here's the issue. So here's the psak. If you took the meatball out while it's still bubbling, then it's fine. Because while the milk is still bubbling, it can't do both. The meatball could absorb milk, but it can't do it. But if you let the milk settle and not bubble anymore, you let the boiling stop, then the meatball is gonna, and then all of a sudden, there's now milk flavor, there's now milk in the pot that was in a meatball, the guy will not be able to taste it. So that's why you need shishim. So in other words, according to the Mechaber, you can have a guy taste it as long as you remove the meatball while the milk is still bubbling. But if you let the milk settle, you won't be able to have a guy taste it. You'll just have to settle on shishim. By the way, okay.
Just while it's bubbling. boiling it won't do what?
It won't do both. The meat will absorb the milk flavor, but it won't pump it out.
Boiling won't take it back?
It can't do both. So the meatball will be able to suck up the milk, but it can't.
The milk is boiling?
While the milk is boiling, meaning while the meat is
It
in.
won't be boiling.
No, so while the meat is in boiling milk, the meat can't multitask.
So
The meat.
It can only be boiling but not
Cor-
boiling?
So it could give off its own essence, interestingly enough. It can give off its own meatball flavor, but it can't, vis-a-vis the milk, it can't do both. It can't multitask with the milk.
And the milk doesn't have the same issue?
No. So the meat is able to suck up meat, but not give it out.
Well,
The milk just gets the meat flavor. Again, the meat is able to give off its own flavor essence. That I don't know why it's able to do, but vis-a-vis the milk, it can't multitask. That's from the Gemara. So therefore, if you get the meatball out while the milk is still boiling, then you can have a guy taste it. But if you let the milk settle, which by the way, for the record, is what you should do. If this ever happens to you, don't try to remove the meatball right away. I'll tell you why. Because if you put in a metal spoon to try to get the meatball out, you've now asered your spoon. Because you now put a meatball with a little bit of milk on your spoon, you've now trafed up your spoon. That's like most rabbis would tell you that if something falls in that's like trafe, use plastic, not plastic, use like a toothpick or whatever, or just turn off the fire and let it settle. But then it creates this issue.
So a big plastic spoon is not a problem?
No, I mean if it's a disposable spoon, but if you have like a milchik plastic spoon or a fleshik plastic spoon, you're putting it in. You're now trafing up your spoon, and then you're going to use the spoon to make eggs, and it's going to be a whole to do. So again, the basic premise is we'll read the mechaber. The basic premise is that the meatball, if the milk is still bubbling, the meatball will just give off its own essence, so you'll be able to taste it. It won't suck up milk and pump out milk. But if you let the milk boil, if you have the boiling stop, then the meatball will be comfortable and he'll just, and then all of a sudden you now have milk in the milk. That's an issue, and a guy won't be able to taste that, and you'll need shishim. Okay, we'll just read the mechaber inside. The mechaber says, "Kazayis basar shenafel otech yorish shachol v'reseich." You have a kazayis basar that fell into a pot of boiling milk. Have a guy taste it. Now, by the way, if you just look for a second in Bays, which guy? This is later on. So the Shach says, "Ayin lekaman reish siman tzadichas debeinon she'edafka kfeila oy mesich lefituma." Here's the issue, by the way. This is just a side. I think you're a Sfaradish person here, so you have to defend the mechaber. How are you going to have a guy? How are we Semicha on a guy? Since when do we care about what a guy says when it comes to halacha? How are we Semicha on a guy? So the answer is, the mechaber says it's one of two ways. He's either a chef, and he knows we're relying on him, but he doesn't want to ruin his reputation. So if you ask him, hey, you're a chef, he has to be a chef. Do you taste milk here? Or do you taste meat here in the milk? So he knows that Jews are relying on him, but he doesn't want to ruin his reputation. Or he doesn't know we're relying on him, and you're just asking him, and he doesn't know you're relying on him, you're just like, hey, settle a bet. And then we just assume he's not lying. But if he taka knows and he's not a chef, then it's a problem. By the way, the reason why yeah? What do you mean? No, we just can't rely on Goyim. He's not Neman. Eid Echon is Nembis. No, it's not a Goyim can taste. No, it's not. So now, by the way, why do Jews why do Ashkenazim? Not Jews. Why do Ashkenazim not rely on Goyim? So the reason why we don't rely on Goyim is two different opinions brought down in the Shach. So Shach and Levush. Later on, it's either that Ashkenazim, A, we don't trust Goyim, or B, nowadays, we don't believe that people's palates are as good as they used to. That's an interesting one, considering we have culinary stuff. Our palates are not as good. So what's the nafka mina between the two? Can you rely on a Jew? You say, when would I rely on a Jew? Very simple. I have a meatball fell into pasta, whatever, and I have to know, do you taste the pasta here? Am I fleshik? So I'll taste it as a yid. You don't want to be fleshik. I'll taste it and I'll tell you. Do you taste meat here? You know what I mean? So that would be an example. If we just don't rely on yid, if we don't rely on goyim, you can rely on a yid. Or if our palates are not sophisticated anymore, then you can't rely on a Jew either.
Another example would be if Sfaradi can trust a goy, then he trusts a Jew, which is
It's probably better to just avoid eating with Sfaradi. So anyway, so the Mechaber says, I'm joking. Is what happens, by the way. Is what happens when you put me in the sun for 12 hours. My brain begins to melt. Let's just do the mechaber and we'll finish up. The mechaber says, "Kazayis basar shenafal techiyarish acholav reseich." You have a kazayis basar that falls into boiling milk. Tayim avikam kadera. Have a guy taste it. Im amar sheish beitam basar asur v'im lav muteres. Okay. Afil pachas meshishim. By the way, if the guy doesn't taste taste meat in the milk, then it's fine, even if it's less shishim. When can he taste it? Because all he's looking for is meat flavor. Is It's when you took the meatball out before the meatball was able to release the milk that it absorbed back into the pot. However, which is before the milk stopped bubbling. But if you let the milk no longer boil, so the meat now released its flavor. So now all of a sudden in this pot, you don't just have meat flavor, you also have milk that was in meat that's back in the milk. So you have milk that's a problem. And the guy's not going to be able to taste the distinction between milk that's a problem and milk that's not a problem, because they all taste like milk. And then you'll need shishim. So that's the situation. It's like a very clever, test to answer. What's a situation where even Svardim would require shishim? It's if you let the meatball sit in the pot after the milk stopped boiling. Comes the Ramah and he says a very obvious thing for Ashkenazim: this entire sif is no longer relevant. They're distinct. They're handling whether you need shishim or not. Says the Ramah one with this. We don't rely on him anymore. So we always need shishim. So this entire thing is a moot point. Whether you let the milk boil or stop boiling is irrelevant. You'll always need shishim. All right, we'll stop here. Woo.